Now that the whole family is gathered to celebrate Nick's wedding, my father announced into the microphone, interrupting our first dance, "I have an important announcement to make." My wife Claire looked at me confused as the 200 guests turned their attention to Harold Brennan, the patriarch of Brennan Technologies. Even at my own wedding, he couldn't resist being the center of attention. "After 30 years of building our family business, the time has come for a new phase," he continued, his beaming smile contrasting with a knot forming in my stomach. "We've decided to sell Brennan Technologies. The buyer has offered $60 million. Polite applause echoed through the hall. Claire squeezed my hand, whispering what an amazing wedding gift in my ear. If only she knew what was coming next. "And as we've always planned, to keep the family legacy alive," Dad raised a champagne glass, "the entire proceeds will go to my eldest son Nathan, so he can start his own company and carry on the Brennan tradition." The silence that followed was deafening. 200 people simultaneously processing that the groom-me had just been publicly cut out of the family inheritance on his wedding day. "My name is Nicholas Brennan, I'm 31 years old, and I just found out that my father chose the most important day of my life to humiliate me in front of everyone I know." But while Nathan received congratulations and pats on the back, I kept my smile forced. Because there's something my father doesn't know about me. Something that will turn this public humiliation into the biggest upset in our family's history. I grew up as the invisible middle child of the Brennans. Nathan, 3 years older, was always the natural heir. With a degree in business, he was charismatic, everything a businessman father could want. My younger sister Rebecca was the spoiled princess who could do anything without consequences. And me? I was the family nerd. The one who preferred computers to sports, code to small talk. When I showed interest in the family business, Dad dismissed me with a "leave that to those who understand it, son." Brennan Technologies started as a small software company in the late 1990s. Dad was lucky to ride the internet wave and turned the company into a $40 million annual revenue operation. Not bad for someone who barely knew how to use email when he started. The problem was that Dad never evolved. As the market shifted to cloud solutions, artificial intelligence, and automation, he insisted on sticking with legacy systems and outdated methods. Over the past 5 years, the company had been steadily losing customers. Nathan, as vice president of operations, just agreed with everything Dad said. After all, why question when you know you're going to inherit everything anyway? His only contributions were expensive lunches with potential clients and reports copied from the internet. When I turned 22, fresh out of MIT with a degree in computer science, I presented my dad with a detailed plan to modernize the company. He listened to me for exactly 10 minutes before interrupting. "Nick, you understand technology, but business is for men with life experience." That night, I made the decision that would change everything. If he didn't want my help to save the company, I would build my own. For 9 years, while everyone thought I was playing with computers in California, I quietly built an empire. I used the pseudonym N.B. Stone, Nicholas Brennan Stone, and created Apex Digital Solutions. What started as freelance consulting turned into a $120 million company specializing in the very technologies Brennan Technologies ignored. Ironically, several of my father's biggest competitors became my clients. As we danced our first song as a couple, I watched my father being congratulated by the guests. They congratulated him on his generosity toward Nathan, unaware of the cruelty of announcing this at my wedding. Claire noticed my tension. "Are you okay? I know it must hurt not to get anything from the inheritance." I smiled and spun her around the dance floor. "Actually, honey, I think it's going to be really interesting to find out who bought the company." If you're enjoying this family business story, be sure to subscribe to the channel, because what's coming next will show you that it's not always the last laugh that counts. Because tomorrow morning, when the contracts are signed, my father will discover that N.B. Stone, the mysterious buyer of Brennan Technologies, is much closer than he thinks. The party continued as if nothing had happened. The guests returned to their conversations, some whispering discreetly about the announcement. Claire kept her bridal smile, but I could feel her confusion growing with every handshake from people offering disguised condolences. "What a delicate situation," Aunt Margaret murmured, kissing my cheek. "But I'm sure your father knows what he's doing." Harold Brennan always knew exactly what he was doing. Especially when it came to putting me in my place. When I won the State Programming Award at 16, he arrived late to the ceremony because he had an important meeting. Nathan, who had failed calculus that same semester, got a new car to motivate him to try harder. At 21, when I landed an internship at Google, Dad remarked at the dinner table, "I hope this knocks the entrepreneurial fantasies out of her head. Big companies need employees, not dreamers." Nathan, who had been expelled from 2 colleges for cheating, was promoted to junior consultant at Brennan Technologies that same day. The pattern was always the same. My successes were minimized, coincidences or luck. Nathan's failures were learning experiences that made him more mature for leadership. But the moment that changed everything happened 3 years ago at Thanksgiving dinner. I had just received my second round of investment for Apex Digital Solutions, $20 million that would turn my startup into a real company. "Dad, I have some news," I began, unable to contain my excitement. "My company has received a significant investment. We're expanding into 3 new states." Harold barely looked up from his turkey. "That's great, son. Nathan, tell your brother about the new contract you landed." Nathan, who I knew had lost 2 major clients that month, began fabricating details about a supposed $1 million deal. Dad listened with religious attention, asking detailed questions and showing the kind of interest he never showed in my projects. "See, Nick," Dad said at the end, "that's how you build a real business. With relationships, not computer tricks." That night, I made the decision that would culminate in this moment. If Harold Brennan wanted to pretend I didn't exist, I would disappear completely, until I was ready to reappear with full force. I watched Nathan across the room, receiving congratulations from his uncles and cousins. At 34, he had settled perfectly into the role of the unworthy heir. His hair was always perfectly coiffed, he wore expensive suits that Dad paid for, and he had that arrogant smile of someone who was born believing he deserved everything. "Thanks, Uncle Robert," Nathan would say, adjusting his tie. Dad always knew I had a natural instinct for business. It's in my DNA. DNA. As if incompetence were hereditary. For years, I watched Nathan turn every opportunity into a disaster. When Dad put him in charge of the company's biggest client, Nathan outsourced the work to a cheap Indian company, which delivered such a flawed product that we almost lost the contract. The blame was placed on communication failures and unrealistic customer expectations. When Nathan was responsible for hiring new developers, he chose candidates based on personal chemistry, code for people who would suck up to him, resulting in a technical team that could barely update a basic website. The solution was to restructure technical responsibilities to focus on strategy. Each of Nathan's failures was repackaged as valuable experience. Every success I achieved away from the company was ignored or diminished. Claire approached, holding 2 champagne glasses. "Are you okay? You seem distant." "Just processing the news," I replied, accepting the glass. "It must be a shock to find out you married the poor son of the family." She laughed, thinking I was joking. "Nick, you exaggerate. His father must have his reasons. Maybe it's about fiscal responsibility or something." If she only knew that my little consulting firm had closed $15 million in contracts in the last quarter alone. "Besides," Claire continued, $60 million is a lot of money. Even split between the 2 of you." "Not split," I corrected gently. "All for Nathan." The confusion in her eyes deepened. "But why?" Before I could answer, Nathan approached with his new millionaire air smile. "Bro. What an amazing day, huh? My wedding and my future secured." "Your wedding?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Oh, you know what I meant," Nathan laughed, patting my shoulder condescendingly. "Your big day, my big news. It worked out perfectly." Claire frowned. "Nathan, don't you think the timing was a little inappropriate?" "Claire, honey," Nathan assumed his seasoned executive tone, "business doesn't wait for convenient moments. Dad received the offer this morning. $60 million cash, 48-hour deadline. It was take it or leave it." Lies. I knew because I had personally structured every detail of NB Stone Investments' offer. The deadline was flexible, but Harold had chosen this specific moment out of pure calculated cruelty. "And honestly," Nathan continued, "it's better that Nick knows how things are right up front. He's always had these fantasies about joining the family business, but he needs to accept reality." "What reality?" Claire asked, her voice firming. That some people are built for leadership, and others, Nathan shrugged, looking at me with false sympathy. Others are better suited for different paths. The insult was so casual, so naturalized, that Claire finally began to understand what I had endured for decades. At that moment, Dad approached our group, still basking in his performance of power. Nathan, we need to talk about the transition. The new owner wants a meeting tomorrow at 9. Sure, Dad. I'm already thinking of several improvements we can implement. Harold nodded approvingly. Excellent. It's exactly that kind of strategic vision that convinced me to structure the sale this way. He glanced briefly at me, as if remembering my existence. Nick, I hope you understand that this isn't personal. It's about preparing Nathan to lead his own company. Of course, Dad, I replied calmly. I'm sure Nathan is more than ready to meet the new owner tomorrow. Nathan smiled with excessive confidence. It'll be interesting to work with this NB Stone guy. I looked him up, very mysterious, never gives interviews. Must be one of those eccentric tech investors. I'm sure you'll get along great, I said, hiding my smile behind my champagne glass. Dad checked his Rolex. Well, Nathan, let's mingle a little more. There are some investors here you should meet, now that you're the CEO of your own company. As they walked away, Claire stared at me with an expression I had never seen before. Nick, how long has this been going on? What specifically? The way they treat you like you're irrelevant. The question hurt more than I expected. Not because it was offensive, but because someone had finally noticed. Always, I replied simply. Claire was silent for a long moment, watching Harold and Nathan greet guests as if they were a presidential duo. Well, she said finally, they don't know who they're messing with, do they? I smiled genuinely for the first time that night. No, honey. They really don't. Because tomorrow at 9 in the morning, when Nathan walked confidently into the boardroom expecting to meet the mysterious NB Stone, he would discover that the new owner of the family business had a very familiar face. And that a few computer tricks can be worth a lot more than $60 million. The party continued, but the dynamic had completely changed. Nathan was now the center of attention, telling anyone who would listen about his visionary plans for the new company. I'm going to modernize everything, he declared to a group of impressed uncles. Dad built a solid foundation, but it needs someone with vision to take it to the next level. Forward thinking. From someone who still used Internet Explorer because it works perfectly fine. Claire squeezed my arm tighter with each new declaration from Nathan. She was beginning to understand the pattern I had known for decades. Nick has always been more technical, Nathan continued, gesturing with his champagne glass. But leading a company requires interpersonal skills, business acumen. It's not for everyone. My cousin David, who worked at Goldman Sachs, asked the question I was waiting for, what about Nick? Isn't he going to be part of the transition? Nathan laughed condescendingly. Nick has his own things going on in California. Small consulting firms, you know how it is. Dad and I thought it best not to burden him with responsibilities beyond his experience. The lie was told with such naturalness that I almost admired her audacity. Small consulting firms. If they only knew that my small consulting firm had just closed an 8-figure deal with Microsoft. Besides, Nathan continued, warming to the attention, I need someone completely dedicated to growing the company. Nick has always been a little distracted. Very much his own man, you know. Claire turned to me, her eyes flashing with indignation. You're going to let him talk about you like that? For now, I muttered, watching Nathan hand out makeshift business cards with CEO in transition written on them. It was then that Rebecca approached, visibly uncomfortable with the whole situation. At 28, my sister had always been the most sensitive member of our family, often serving as a silent mediator between the toxic dynamics of the Brennans. Nick, can I talk to you for a moment? She asked, pulling me into a more private corner of the room. This isn't right, she said, her words coming out in nervous bursts. Announcing this at your wedding, excluding you completely. I confronted Dad an hour ago. Do you know what he said? I waited, though I already knew the answer. That you wouldn't have the head to manage that kind of responsibility. That Nathan was born to lead. As if you were some kind of incompetent. Rebecca shook her head in frustration. Nick, I know you're building something big in California. I may not understand all the technical details, but I see how you talk about your work. There's passion there, real knowledge. Rebecca. No. Let me finish. Her hands were shaking slightly. We grew up in the same house. I saw you build computers at 12, hack the school network at 15, win those programming awards. Nathan can barely use Excel without help. Rebecca's validation touched on something I had tried to bury for years. At least someone in the family had paid attention. And the worst part, she continued, is that Dad knows it. He knows you're more capable, smarter, more innovative. But something in him can't accept that. Why do you think that is? I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. Rebecca hesitated, then sighed deeply. Because you remind him of what he isn't. Dad got lucky with the company, right time, right place. But you? You have genuine talent. It scares him. Our musings were interrupted when we heard Nathan raise his voice across the room. Frankly, I think Nick feels relieved, he was saying to an even larger group of guests. Family pressure, expectations, responsibilities. Not everyone is cut out for this kind of life. Claire had positioned herself on the periphery of the group, her fists clenched. I could see exactly when her patience snapped. Nathan, she interrupted, her voice cutting through the conversation, would you mind not talking about my husband as if he weren't here? The room grew quieter. Nathan blinked, clearly not expecting resistance from his sweet new sister-in-law. Claire, I wasn't. Yes, you were. You spent the last 20 minutes belittling Nick's accomplishments to people who barely know him. I felt a wave of pride and panic at the same time. Claire was defending my honor, but she was also escalating a situation I would rather keep under control. Nathan assumed his familiar defensive posture. Look, Claire, I know you want to support your husband, but there are family dynamics you don't understand. I understand perfectly, Claire replied, her voice firming. I understand that you've spent the entire evening promoting yourself at his expense. At his wedding. The room was now almost completely silent. Even the side conversations had stopped. Harold appeared as if summoned by paternal radar, moving quickly to control the situation. Everyone, he said with his political smile, let's keep the focus on the celebration. Nathan, how about a toast to the bride and groom? But the damage was done. The mask had slipped, and several people in the room had now seen the real family dynamic in action. As Nathan raised his glass for a forced toast, I made my final decision. For 31 years, I had accepted being the invisible son, the underrated brother, the family member whose accomplishments were systematically minimized or ignored. But as I watched Nathan toast my brother Nick and his beautiful wife, using my own wedding as a platform for his personal celebration, I felt something harden inside me. It would no longer be about proving my worth to them. It would be about showing them exactly how blind they had chosen to be. Tomorrow morning, NB Stone Investments would meet with Brennan Technologies leadership to discuss the transition. Nathan would walk into that room expecting to meet a mysterious investor willing to finance his business dreams. Instead, he would discover that some revenge is worth waiting a decade to execute perfectly. And that underestimating the wrong son of the family can cost a lot more than $60 million. The morning after the wedding brought an emotional hangover that had nothing to do with champagne. Claire woke up before me, sitting on the edge of the bed with a cup of coffee, staring out the window of our hotel room. Are you really going to let this go? She asked without turning around. Let it go what? The humiliation. The exclusion. The way they talked about you in front of all our family and friends. I sat down next to her, pulling her closer. Claire, there are things about me, about my company, that you don't know yet. She turned to face me, studying my face. Then tell me. For 3 hours, I explained everything. How I had built Apex Digital Solutions. How NB Stone was my pseudonym. How I had spent the last 18 months studying every aspect of Brennan Technologies, identifying weaknesses, mapping dependencies. You're telling me, Claire said slowly, that you're the mystery buyer? That you bought your father's company. Technically, NB Stone Investments made an offer to acquire the company that was accepted by the board. I just coordinated the details. Claire was silent for a long moment. Then she started to laugh. Not a nervous laugh, but a genuine one that grew into a belly laugh that doubled her over. Nathan is going to find out that you're the new boss, she managed to say between laughs. My God, Nick. That's brilliant and terrible at the same time. As Claire processed the revelation, my phone rang. It was Marcus Chun, my lawyer and CFO of Apex Digital Solutions. Nick, we have a small problem with Brennan's paperwork. They're asking for additional information about NB Stone's ownership structure before they'll finalize it. What kind of information? Nothing that compromises your identity yet, but Harold Brennan is being more diligent than we expected. He's hired an independent auditing firm to verify our assets. That was unexpected. Dad had never shown this level of caution in business before. Marcus, speed up the paperwork. I want everything signed before they have time to ask too many questions. After I hung up, Claire looked at me with concern. Problems. Dad's being more careful than usual. Maybe Nathan suggested a more rigorous audit. What does that mean? It means I need to speed up the schedule. We spent the rest of the morning canceling the honeymoon that had lasted only one night. Claire insisted on accompanying me to watch the show, as she began to call it. At 2 in the afternoon, we were at Harold's law office, where the final signing of the contracts would take place. I had arrived an hour before the meeting, using a side entrance, and was waiting in the adjacent conference room. Through the frosted glass wall, I could see Harold and Nathan arrive on time. Nathan was wearing his best suit and carrying a leather briefcase that I recognized as a Christmas gift Dad had given him years ago. Nervous? I heard Nathan ask as they organized documents. A little, Harold admitted. Something about this NB Stone bothers me. Too much secrecy, too much haste. Successful businessmen usually like to show their faces. Maybe he's just introverted, Nathan suggested. A lot of tech geniuses are like that. Tech genius. If Nathan knew he had called his own brother a genius. Harold's lawyer, Thomas Whitfield, entered the room carrying several folders. Gentlemen, I have good news and bad news about the audit of NB Stone's assets. My stomach tightened. The bad news is that they maintain an almost impenetrable level of privacy. The good news is that this is typical of high-performance investors. All verifiable assets are solid. The money is real. Harold visibly relaxed. What about Stone himself? Any personal information? Very little. We know he's relatively young to have built this kind of wealth. Probably early 30s. Tech education. History of successful startups. Nathan laughed. Sounds familiar. Reminds me of you at the same age, Dad. Maybe, Harold muttered, but I could tell something was still bothering him. At 3 o'clock sharp, Marcus entered the room where I was waiting. Ready. I took a deep breath, adjusted my tie, and followed Marcus into the main conference room. Harold and Nathan had their backs to us as we entered, examining documents spread out on the table. Their lawyer made the formal introductions. Harold, Nathan, I'd like to introduce NB Stone, of NB Stone Investments. They turned simultaneously. Harold's face went through 3 distinct expressions in less than 2 seconds: confusion, recognition, and finally, absolute shock. Nathan needed a few seconds longer. When he finally understood, his leather briefcase slipped from his hands, documents scattering across the marble floor. Nick. Harold whispered, as if he were seeing a ghost. Hello, Dad. Nathan. I extended my hand formally. Pleased to meet you officially as NB Stone. The silence that followed was so heavy I could hear the central air conditioning and distant traffic 16 floors below. Nathan found his voice first. Is this a joke? The $60 million in your bank account suggests not, I replied calmly. Harold sank into his chair, removing his glasses to clean lenses that weren't dirty. How? How did I build a $120 million company? Hard work, strategic vision, and maybe a little bit of that natural business instinct you always said I didn't have. The penny began to drop for Nathan. You tricked us. You lied to the whole family. Nathan, I've never lied about anything. You just never asked about my work with genuine interest. Harold finally looked up. NB Stone. Nicholas Brennan Stone. Stone is my mother's maiden name. I thought it was appropriate to honor the side of the family that always supported me. Thomas Whitfield, clearly uncomfortable with the unexpected family dynamic, cleared his throat. Gentlemen, perhaps we should proceed with the signing? The documents are all in order. One moment, Harold raised his hand. Nick, why did you do this? Why didn't you come to us directly? The question I had waited years to hear. I did, Dad. When I was 22, I presented a detailed plan to modernize the company. You told me I didn't understand business. When I suggested partnerships with technology companies, you said they were passing fads. Every idea I presented was dismissed before it was even considered. Nathan tried to intervene. But that doesn't justify. Nathan, I interrupted, my voice growing firmer, in the last 9 years, how many times have you asked me about my work? How many times have you shown genuine interest in what I'm building? He opened his mouth, then closed it. And you, Dad? At any point during our quarterly calls, did you ever ask about my company? About my clients? About my employees? Harold looked down. The truth is, you created this NB Stone. It exists because Nicholas Brennan was never respected enough to have his ideas heard in this family. If you think this family revenge is getting intense, subscribe to the channel, because what comes next will show you that some lessons are learned the hard way. Marcus placed the final contracts on the table. Gentlemen, I need everyone to sign today. The window of opportunity for this tax structure closes tomorrow. Harold looked at the papers, then at me. And if I refuse to sign? Then you lose the $60 million, the company goes bankrupt within 6 months due to lack of operating capital, and I buy the assets in liquidation for about $10 million. Nathan turned pale. You planned this all along. I planned to give our family a chance to prosper under new management. What happens from here on out is up to you. Harold picked up the pen, hesitated for a moment that seemed like an eternity, and signed his name. Nathan looked at his father, then at me, and finally at the contracts that would officially make his despised brother his new boss. Nathan stared at the contracts as if they were a death sentence. I won't sign this. You can't force me to work for you. You're right, I replied calmly. I can't force you. But the contracts are already valid with Dad's signature as chairman of the board. Your signature is just to confirm your position as transitional CEO. Transitional CEO? Nathan asked, confusion replacing anger in his voice. Marcus opened another folder. The responsibilities of the position are detailed here. Basically, you'll oversee the integration of legacy systems while our technical team implements the necessary updates. Harold finally found his voice. Nick, is this about money? I can increase your share of the inheritance. Dad, this has never been about money. My voice came out firmer than I intended. It's about respect. About recognition. About 30 years of being treated like my ideas are worthless. Nathan tried one last card. What if I expose all of this? Tell the whole family how you cheated us. I smiled genuinely for the first time in the meeting. Nathan, you're free to tell the story however you want. Just make sure you mention that your $120 million company was built by the brother you considered a failure. The color drained from Nathan's face. For the first time, he was fully comprehending the magnitude of the situation. Harold leaned forward. 120 million? Nick, that's impossible. You barely had enough money to come home for Christmas. I had enough money, Dad. I just chose not to spend it on tickets for a family that never showed any genuine interest in seeing me. Thomas Whitfield cleared his throat again. Gentlemen, we still need to finalize some contractual details. Actually, I interrupted, there's something you don't know yet. I signaled to Marcus, who placed a third set of documents on the table. What's that? Harold asked suspiciously. Brennan Technologies wasn't my first acquisition from this family. Nathan frowned. What are you talking about? 6 months ago, I bought the mortgage on the house you live in. The same house where we grew up, where Dad built his first office, where the Brennan family put down its roots. The silence that followed was absolute. Harold opened and closed his mouth several times before he could speak. The mortgage? But we paid off the house 15 years ago. You paid off the original mortgage. But when you needed capital to expand the company 4 years ago, you used the house as collateral for a $2 million loan. Nathan turned pale. The loan with First National. which was sold to a consortium of investors after you missed 3 consecutive payments last year. A consortium that I control through NB Stone Investments. Harold sank further into his chair. We didn't miss any payments. Marcus opened a different folder. The records clearly show 3 missed payments between March and May of last year, totaling 93 days past due. That's impossible, Nathan protested. I make the payments myself every month. Nathan, he said softly, do you remember transferring money from the company account to cover your sports betting debts? Her expression changed from confusion to horror. How did you? $28,000 in March. $35,000 in April. $42,000 in May. Always in the week before the mortgage was due. Harold turned to Nathan with an expression I had never seen before. You stole from the company? I didn't steal, Nathan stammered. I was going to pay it all back. They were just temporary loans. Temporary loans that caused delays in mortgage payments, allowing the bank to sell the debt to outside investors, I finished. Reality was finally setting in for both of them. Not only had I bought the family business, but I had also bought the house they lived in. So you're our boss and our landlord, Harold said, his voice barely above a whisper. Technically, yes. Nathan exploded. This is pure revenge. You plan to destroy our family. Nathan, if I wanted to destroy you, I would have foreclosed months ago and forced the sale of the house. I would have publicly exposed your embezzlement. I would have bought the company for much less at a bankruptcy auction. I paused to let that sink in. Instead, I paid $60 million for a company worth $40 at most. I offered you both respectable positions in the new structure. And the house? You can continue to live there for as long as you want. Harold slowly raised his eyes. Why? Because despite everything, you are my family. And because I believe people can change when they finally understand the consequences of their actions. Claire, who had remained silent in the adjacent room via an audio monitor, chose that moment to enter. Sorry to intrude, but I thought you might like to know that the news is already in the business papers. She placed a tablet on the table displaying the Boston Business Journal. The headline read, Tech Genius Reveals Himself as Despised Brennan Heir, Buys Family Company in Epic Turnaround. Nathan read the headline aloud, his voice breaking slightly on the word despised. The story is already being shared nationally, Claire continued. Apparently, someone leaked details about how you were consistently overlooked by the family despite your superior qualifications. Harold closed his eyes. Our reputation will be rebuilt, I interrupted firmly. But this time based on actual merit, not nepotism and favoritism. Marcus glanced at his watch. Gentlemen, we need to finalize these documents. There's a press conference scheduled for 5 o'clock. Nathan finally picked up the pen, his hand shaking slightly. If I sign this, what exactly do you expect from me? Honesty, hard work, and a willingness to learn from people who really understand the business. He signed his name with deliberate, careful movements. Harold looked at me across the table. Nick, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything yet, Dad. Let your actions over the next few months speak for you. When all the documents were signed and notarized, I stood up to leave. At the door, I turned back one last time. Oh, and one more thing you should know before the press conference. They both looked at me with renewed apprehension. Claire is pregnant. You're going to be a grandfather and an uncle. The look of pure shock on their faces would have been comical under other circumstances. I hope that when my son is born, he grows up in a family that values real talent over inherited privilege. I left the room, leaving them to process not only that they had lost control of everything they had built, but that they now had the chance to rebuild relationships that seemed irreparably broken. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies, but forcing them to become better people. And the real test of character would come at the press conference, when the whole world would be watching to see how the Brennan family would deal with their new reality. The 5 o'clock press conference was a spectacle no business journalist expected to witness. Harold and Nathan sat beside me on the stage at the Four Seasons Hotel, their expressions oscillating between embarrassment and forced resignation. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, looking directly into the cameras, today marks not only a change in ownership, but a complete evolution of Brennan Technologies' business philosophy. For 20 minutes, I publicly explained how I had built Apex Digital Solutions and why I chose to acquire the family business. I didn't mention Nathan's debts or the most intimate details of our family dysfunction, but I made it clear that merit and vision, not family connections, would drive our future decisions. A Forbes reporter asked the question everyone was waiting for, "Mr. Stone, how did your family react when they discovered your true identity?" Harold leaned into the microphone before I could answer. "My son has completely surprised me. And I can say with pride that underestimating Nicholas Brennan was the biggest business mistake of my career." The public admission caught Nathan and me completely off guard. I looked at my father, seeing something in his eyes I had never seen before, genuine respect mixed with deep regret. Nathan also spoke, his voice hesitant but sincere. "I learned today that competence is not hereditary. My brother built something extraordinary while I squandered opportunities one didn't deserve." 6 months after the press conference, the Brennan family's transformation had become a case study in business schools everywhere. Not just because of the internal acquisition, but because of how we all evolved after the confrontation. Nathan fulfilled his promise to change in surprising ways. He joined Alcoholics Anonymous, not just for his gambling, but for the drinking problem he had never publicly admitted. He started as an assistant in our customer service division, refusing any preferential treatment. "I want to learn the business from the bottom up," he told me during our first monthly review meeting. "Just like you did." Harold embraced his new role as chairman emeritus with a humility that surprised me every day. He began mentoring young entrepreneurs, sharing not only his successes but specifically his errors in judgment about talent and meritocracy. "I spent decades looking for a successor who looked like me," he wrote in an article for the Harvard Business Review. "Meanwhile, the real leader was right in front of me, just waiting for a chance to prove his worth." Claire gave birth to our daughter, Emma, in March. When Harold held her for the first time, he whispered in her ear, "Your grandpa is going to make sure you grow up in a family that recognizes greatness, no matter where it comes from." Brennan Technologies, now operating as a division of Apex Holdings, grew 40% in its first year under new management. We implemented exactly the technological innovations I had proposed a decade earlier, plus advances we had developed in California. Rebecca became our communications director, discovering a natural talent for translating technical innovation into accessible language. "I always knew you'd be amazing," she told me during our first-year anniversary lunch. "I just didn't know you'd be so devastatingly strategic." The most significant moment came not during a corporate presentation or media interview, but on a quiet afternoon in the office. Nathan knocked on my door, carrying a familiar folder. "Remember this presentation?" he asked, placing my original proposal from 10 years ago on the table. I found it in the file room. I read it all the way through for the first time. He flipped through the pages carefully. "Nick, this is exactly what we implemented this year. Every detail, every market prediction, every implementation strategy. You were right about everything." He paused, looking out the window at the Boston skyline. "I wonder where we would be if Dad had listened to you back then." "It doesn't matter where we would be," I replied. "What matters is where we are now and where we're going from here." The real transformation wasn't my rise from rejected son to successful CEO. It was witnessing an entire family learn that greatness doesn't come from titles or inheritance, but from character, competence, and the courage to acknowledge mistakes. Harold didn't just formally apologize to me, he completely restructured his perspectives on leadership and legacy. Nathan didn't just accept his limitations, he actively worked to overcome them through education and humility. During the second Thanksgiving dinner after the acquisition, when everyone at the table shared genuine gratitude instead of competing for status, I realized I had achieved something far more valuable than revenge. I had created reconciliation. 3 years later, I look out from our 20th floor office overlooking Boston Harbor. Emma plays on the floor with building blocks, occasionally running to the window to wave at Grandpa Harold, who shows up religiously for lunch every Friday. Nathan now manages our client development division, a position he truly earned through years of hard work and personal growth. His ideas, when grounded in real experience rather than assumed privilege, are often brilliant. The most important lesson I learned wasn't about building business empires or executing elaborate vendettas. It was about the transformative power of giving people the opportunity to become better versions of themselves, even when they don't initially deserve that opportunity. Harold often tells me that his greatest pride is not that he built a $40 million company, but that he raised a son capable of turning it into a $200 million company while keeping our family values intact. You taught me that true leadership isn't about controlling people, he said last week. It's about inspiring them to exceed what they thought was possible. If this story of family, business, and second chances has touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories about how perseverance and intelligence can turn rejection into triumph. Every person has untapped potential waiting for the right opportunity. Yesterday, Emma built a tower with her blocks that was taller than she is. When I asked her how she did it, she replied, "Daddy, I just kept adding blocks until I got where I wanted to go." Sometimes the deepest wisdom comes from the simplest places. And sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming the person you always knew you could be, and giving others the chance to do the same. In the end, I didn't destroy my family. I rebuilt it, one block at a time.